Welcome to our newest episode of the Lebanese Physicians Podcast. And today we actually are talking to the founders of Mind Easy, which is a platform based on artificial intelligence that we will discuss a bit later, and it's related to mental health. And my guests today are Alexandra Assouad, Dalia Ahmed, and Akanksha Shelat, who are the founders of this platform. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Khalil.
Thank you
It's
so much for
great.
having us.
Of course, 100%. The reason I invited you guys is because I saw the invite that you received from LabNet and the recognition that you had. And also, I was interested in the role of AI in healthcare in general, because it's a growing role at this point, and this is one of the platforms that we can discuss today. So I'll start with Alexandra. Alexandra, can you give me a background of how you got involved in like startup companies and like what did you study at university and stuff like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was actually born and raised in Lebanon and moved to Canada at 18 to pursue my studies in finance and economics. So big numbers girl. 2 years down the road, I built my first startup called Chirpy, which I successfully sold in late 2019 to an digitization company. And then I went into investment banking, venture capital funding, specifically for healthcare companies. During my time at the VC fund, I met Dalia and Akanksha, and this is when we decided to merge our very complementary skill sets to start building Mind Easy. The three of us actually come from very diverse backgrounds. I think each one of us will touch on this, but Dalia as well is from Yemen, Akanksha from India. And we all, bonded in terms of not being able to find mental health solutions that would understand our cultural backgrounds.
Right. And so Dalia, what's your background? Is from Yemen, and you also like were in finance before?
So a little bit different from finance. My background is actually in the clinical space. So my background, my parents are from Yemen. As you can imagine, they left a long time ago because of the wars that are happening. I was born and raised in Emirates. I grew up there, and then between there and Jordan, and then I moved to Canada. So very different, this third culture child experience. So a lot of different intersecting identities. And I studied psychology. So right now I'm actually completing my PhD in multicultural psychotherapy, specifically at the University of Toronto. But during, a lot of the training, the academic background that I received in the leading hospital in mental health and the leading educational systems in Canada as well, we were able to really identify some research that shows that, there are advancements in the field. There has been advancements in the field in terms of cultural adaptations and focusing on identity to increase the outcomes of mental health and the different attitudes and how we can really optimize the way that we interact with this approach. But we're not implementing it. And so this was a really wonderful opportunity, especially from my background, having this intersectional identity, to really be able to think about how we can actually bridge those gaps, especially as I'm seeing them in this space. So clinical background, I was trained in dialectical behavior therapy. I worked with a lot of, suicidality, mood disorders, and seeing what contributes to the development of those as well. So this is what led me and the team to really think about how we can really reach things in a preventative manner, which is where we sit now.
So now we have a finance background and a clinical psychology background. So Akanksha, what's your background?
As you can imagine, I am the tech part of the company now. So my background is in computer science and cognitive science. Like Dalia and Alex, I also come from a very diverse background. I was born in India. I was raised in the Middle East and Dubai as well. And then I moved to the University of Toronto to pursue my studies. So my interests and passions were always aligned to improve human experiences and use technology to do it. And with my studies in cognitive science, I really wanted to build something that focused in health tech. So I've previously also partnered with institutions like Johns Hopkins University to create behavioral experiments for them in behavioral economics. So that's what Alex meant earlier by our complementary skill sets.
Yeah, so it's interesting. You use three complementary skill sets that are needed to create this startup company, which is great. And so So basically, I guess you decided also to create it because you're all coming from different diverse backgrounds, and you felt that when you moved to different places such as Canada or the US, you felt that you had this what I would call, I guess, sometimes people get homesickness or they get anxiety related to these moves. And then when you had these issues, you didn't find people who potentially can understand your or mental health, who can understand your problems very well or understand your culture, right? And it was hard to find an appointment. So basically, my question for you is, like, after you moved to the US and Canada, like, do you know what the incidence like of mental health issues in and outside the workplace are in North America?
Yeah, I think that we see that people reach crisis. I think around 25% of the population will reach crisis at some point in their life. And we see these stats everywhere. But when it comes to the vulnerability to mental health, when it comes to interacting with mental health and the system that helps or engages with mental health, this is actually everyone. And I think the pandemic was a real eye-opener that we're all vulnerable to mental health struggles if we don't have emotional literacy. This is pretty much the equivalent of, we're all vulnerable to walking and falling or running and falling, and having, the tools to ice your knee or ankle and know to not walk on it to continue increasing the inflammation and make it worse. So really kind of being able to identify that everybody actually is vulnerable to mental health. And I think some of the work that we're doing is destigmatizing and reestablishing new language for how it is to engage with your mental health. In the workplace, I would say actually, I don't know if Alex and Akanksha would agree with me, but I think every company that we have spoke with has said that these are, employers are talking about it more, employees are talking about it more, that this is a conversation that is happening. And I think this is still something that employers are trying to increase more and more, and almost influencing other companies to do the same.
Right. Yeah, and this could have influence, I guess, on like when you have burnout in the workplace or anger management issues or stuff like that. This could all be related to an underlying mental health issues that could develop or were developed in the past.
Exactly. And a lot of people are working virtually now. And I think this causes a lot of isolation and disconnection. We see a lot of things around confidence, around, imposter syndrome, around even that collaboration with work. It really, that one person being affected with your mental health affects the system and how it interacts and how it operates and how the outcomes and that come out of that, the work that's being done. So we're seeing it on an individual level, but also on an environmental level, a collective level in the workplace.
Yeah, exactly. And so are there adequate resources, I guess, because we've got a lot of mental health issues, and there's always a discussion, especially in the US, let's say with gun violence, all the stuff, they're like, we don't have adequate mental health resources. So are there adequate mental health resources in North America, or is that a problem at this point?
I think there is a huge issue in the States. Therapy is at its peak high, but mental health outcomes are continuously declining. One thing that, we always question is, does therapy work and how do we know it works? What we've noticed with most of our users is, for example, that they don't care about the label. They don't care about that anxiety or depression label, but they care about the tools in order to feel better in that specific moment. So are you dealing with Zoom anxiety, stress, email anxiety, communication skills? And this is where, we're able to come in and bring them pragmatic, practical tools that they usually wouldn't get access to unless they had a diagnosis. Dalia has also spent a lot of time, working with outpatients, clinics, and working with, as she mentioned as well, suicidal individuals that said, I wish I had access to those information before reaching this point. I wish I knew how to communicate my feelings and emotions before reaching crisis.
Yeah, so basically you guys were in the workplace, you've noticed these issues, and you've noticed that potentially, even though there's peak therapy in the US, the mental health problems are increasing, and you're thinking maybe this is happening because there's no prevention. Like, people are getting emotionally drained, they're getting burned out, and they're not being seen by anyone until it's too late or until they develop the depression and anxiety they develop. So that's
Exactly.
yeah. Go ahead.
Oh, so, yeah, I was just echoing your point. Exactly right. And there's also a huge problem when it comes to wait times. It's on average, if you're just looking at California, for example, 3 to 4 months until you're matched with a licensed therapist to be able to have, your initial conversation with them.
So that's when you guys decided, all right, did you leave your jobs? Like you left your jobs and developed the startup company Mind Easy, right? Am I correct?
Yes, exactly right. We all left our jobs and took on Mind Easy full time.
Yeah, that's scary, but you've done a good job. So, 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 so basically, so what's the concept of, and how did you come about to develop Mind Easy, and what's the concept behind it?
Yeah, so when we first started Mind Easy, we knew we wanted to solve two major issues that we saw in the space. One, the shortage of therapists. There is just not enough human capital to cater for this global problem. So we need a machine reliable, scalable solution. And two, the lack of cultural competence when it comes to the field. The one size fits all does not work for everybody and actually can be more damaging for specific culture, demographics, rather than helpful. So being able to build a scalable solution that's still customizable for specific users, identities, and cultural backgrounds.
Akanksha and Dalia, do you want to comment?
Yeah, I think for me, something that that's helped us is that we use a very collective, efficacy approach. We know that, within the three of us, we don't capture all of the identities in the world. And also, the different ways that the mental health space is moving is sometimes pretty scattered. And so it is important for us to be connecting with different leaders in the mental health space, to be working with the different systems that are, step care models. And I think this has been very validating for the way that we have been shaping up our product, the way that we have been integrating ourselves in a system so that it could be cohesive, it could be connected. We don't want to be the only solution, I think, in the field, but we want to improve the journey for mental health, which is why we've seen ourselves kind of move towards that prevention because of those attitudes of mental health. It's such a unique and important opportunity to optimize the outcomes.
Yeah, I was just going to add everything that they said. And I think when we talk about, the mental health system, whether that's in North America or globally, there are so many barriers to access the help, right? So whether that's not knowing even who to start talking to, there's so much terminology in the mental health system. Do I talk to a psychotherapist, a psychologist, a psychiatrist? Where do I go to first start getting mental health? And then all of that happens at, you know, it's very expensive to access that help. And then it takes a lot of time to find that right match and the right person who understands your background and understands where you're coming from. And something that we pointed out previously, we're not all just one thing, right? We're not just women. We're also women and entrepreneurs. We're also young women and entrepreneurs. We also come from three different industries that have three different attitudes about workplace. So there's so many aspects to our life that makes up our identities, and we wanted to cater to a population that is so multifaceted and has all these different layers to themselves and layers to their humanity. And we wanted to give it to them in a manner and at a time where they are capable of dealing with it, and so that they don't reach that point of crisis. Um, and so that they don't actually have to, struggle to find the help. It's almost like it's almost like a guided process where you start at a simple point where you are at a frame of mind where you can understand your mental health, something that's broken down for you in a language that you can understand. We're not throwing diagnoses at you. We're not throwing, research papers and terminology at you. We're actually explaining to you what happens when you're stressed and why does that stress look different to you than it does maybe to your partner or maybe to your boss.
Yeah, so basically what you're trying to do is talk to different companies at this point to adopt or adapt your platform. And so who do you recommend? Let's say you're in a workplace, in a bank or a financial institution, and who would be your clients, or who would be the clients you'd be targeting in that case, and who's your ideal client, I guess?
Yeah, so we work with a lot of different organizations from, the retail space to the gaming space. We've also worked with, very specific organizations such as Enfamil, which was in the perinatal space. And that's really our forte, being able to adapt mental health solutions for very specific populations and communities. Our main targets are large enterprises that employ very diverse workforces, and we go directly after HR departments to make sure that all of their employees get access to our platform.
Okay. So basically, it's not mandatory for every employee to access the platform, but employees who feel that they need to access it are the ones who would access the platform, right?
Yes, absolutely. But we also do promote, very routine engagement with our platform. Even if you're feeling happy, how do you maintain this happiness? How do you regulate your emotions on a consistent level?
So can you walk me through, let's say an employee comes over, employee X comes over and says, I'm accessing the platform right now, and he or she is saying, I feel some stress at work, I'm feeling like more angry recently and stuff like that. So how does the platform interact with them, and tell me a bit more about how the platform was developed and how does it interact with these people? Who wants to go?
I can go over it. So again, something that Dalia pointed out early, we are in the preventative space. So what we have done is built an encouragement to create a safe space for self-guided understanding of mental health. But this is where the AI comes in, and this is where the technology is incorporated. So everything from how they interact with the platform and how many times do they do a mental health check-in every single day, that information is then, processed by our system to understand the user on a behavioral level, and they get specific personalized recommendations for some of our resources. So if we consistently see they're complaining about work or they're complaining about their boss, the resources and catalogs that we have specifically for workplace, specifically for dealing with, maybe my progressions in the workplace, specifically dealing with superiors in the workplace, those will get recommended more and more often to these users. But they also have access to our entire catalog of resources. So when we work with an organization, we work very closely with them to really become partners with them and really understand the space that they're in, really understand the industry they're in. So, do their employees have public-facing roles? Do they deal with customers on their feet every single day? The interactions they have there and the stress they deal there is obviously going to be very different than someone that works in a warehouse or has physical labor as part of their job. So we make sure to do that as the first step and create our resources. And then these resources are available to the user on the platform as they go through their daily well-being.
Yeah. So basically, it's more of an algorithm, right? Like the employees go in, they fill out basic information and questionnaires about their mental health, and then based on these questionnaires and what kind of work they do, then algorithms are developed as to what prescriptions these patients or these individuals are given to deal with their preventative issues. Am I correct?
Yeah, the only thing I would change there is we actually don't make them do questionnaires. What we've seen is there is a over focus on, end users and clients doing a lot of homework again to, reach the mental health help that they need. So we just ask them to sign up with some basic information, and then we do all the interpretation on our end to see, okay, what catalogs are they spending most times in? How often are they coming back to these catalogs? We have a inbuilt chatbot check-in that is essentially a very small interaction to see, hey, how are you doing today? What's making you happy? What's making you upset? Let's put a number on that feeling. Tell me more. Vent to me about, what's contributing to that, whether that's to that happiness, to that stress. And those are some data points that we collect over time to make sure that the system and the platform is customized for that user.
Got it. And so there's catalogs on the website, right? That that people access, but they can access different catalogs depending on what their emotional state is at that point in time. Am I correct?
Yeah,
So
exactly. So we'll recommend things to you according to, some of the behavior that we're seeing, but you still have access. So if you're feeling really happy one day, but you've been feeling really stressed out before, so we'll be able to recommend, hey, today you're happy. Let's talk about that happiness more. But here's also some more information because you've been feeling upset in the past week. So we just make sure that they have something as quickly accessible, literally on their fingertips.
Dalia, you wanted to add something, right?
Yeah, from a clinical perspective, what we wanted to offer is something that is very easily accessible and is a micro interaction that could offer you a micro intervention. And so you go on the app, Akanksha mentioned this daily check-in. So you can go in, you can, like you mentioned, report that you're feeling stressed, whatever it is. And then you receive different options of something that can help you regulate your emotions right then and there. It teaches you and guides you through it so that in that moment, we're giving you what you need and we're pairing those two components together. That's kind of how we're shaping learning and behavior change. But in the long term, we're also taking this information and making suggestions for you so that as soon as you come in, this is something that you've reported, you kind of go through.
And so all of this is basically based on algorithms and artificial intelligence. Is there any interaction with people on this platform?
Not at all.
We really try to stay in the preventive and proactive space, but we do acknowledge that sometimes people might feel, overwhelmed or, very stressed out engaging with some maybe vulnerable experiences. The only thing that is closest to human interaction that we have is a crisis button that redirects you based on your geolocation to the closest helpline that is around you. But when we started MindEasy, our main aim was to create something that wasn't reliant on human capital, so we can keep the therapist for people that are actually really in crisis intervention.
So my couple of more questions for you. One is, have you been measuring, let's say, your outcomes? Because you've been working now with a number of different companies, and what have you seen? What has the feedback been? And have you been measuring, like, are you improving mental health at the workplace, or are you preventing people from, let's say, losing days of work because of depression or anxiety or other things?
Yeah, I think. Go ahead, Alex.
Dalia, if you want to talk maybe about the qualitative and quantitative survey that we've done a couple of months ago, but I'll just talk from an ROI standpoint. Each organization is very unique in terms of, the different workforce dynamics. So for each organization, we try to calculate an ROI based on the information that we have and based on the information that the HR department shares with us. But overall, we do see, amazing outcomes, even from just workforce cohesiveness, different employees learning about different cultures, about how their peers are at work, why they think the way they think, etc.
Yeah, and from a qualitative perspective too, I think we've been, trying to gather, we're always reiterating, I think, because we are in a space that is in innovation, we're always trying to improve and stay on top of things and really understand the new demographics that we interact with and optimize. But when we get this feedback, we've seen, not just the productivity. I think we've seen productivity, we've seen those soft skills that they're able to apply and that apply to their productivity without them knowing that these are actually more only usually offered in therapy. We've also seen something that's really important is that perception of control, which reflects that emotional literacy, is that people are feeling like in moments where they feel helpless or hopeless, that they actually have control over something, which is usually their emotions and changing the situation. Over 80% of our users have been able to acknowledge or feel more acknowledged by the mental health content that's been adapted to a different culture or in different languages. So we're seeing a lot of validation in terms of the need that's there and the attitudes that there. Alex mentioned earlier, a lot of our users are also they're liking a lot of the tools that they're learning. They're not really here looking for a diagnosis. And this has been something that we also believe is something that's part of this high engagement. We cater specifically and focused in our approach on addressing demographics like ourselves that come from backgrounds where mental health is not easily spoken about. There's different attitudes around mental health and taboo and stigma. So the approach has been really important in terms of allowing people to engage with the content and digest it.
Right, because then you also can engage with the content without having to like go out there and say, I'm going to be seeing someone or something like that. So basically it's preventative. You engage with someone without having to tell them, I'm feeling these feelings of anxiety or whatever at the workplace.
Yeah, and even if people are, I think that we also have content that gives people, the language and the steps to confidently move forward into their next level of mental health journey. It's not about saying that you're okay, but at least giving them empowerment to know what they're doing to make informed decisions in their mental health journey. I think I hear all the time that people don't know what a social worker versus psychiatrist versus psychologist, what do I need? What do I have? I think that's very, very common. And so it's important that people know what they have, what they're dealing with, how they want to move forward in a way that is respectable, in a way that is, we're respecting the person's autonomy. And I think that's one of the big tenets in psychotherapy in general. So,
yeah.
And I just wanted to add actually that even, being able to give our users a reflection of some of their usage and some of their moods and emotions has been so interesting because we've been able on our end to see patterns in their behavior, but we have had users report acknowledging, oh, I actually get stressed out every Thursday, and I didn't notice that until I saw that visually, as a visual graph that I get stressed out every Thursday. And I realized that it's because I have this really big team-wide meeting every Thursday that I need to prepare for. So we're also seeing people recognize their own patterns and see how some of these patterns of behavior are impacting their mental health.
And then they would, I assume, change their behavior based on that?
Well, yeah, they'll have tools to cope ahead. They'll have tools for, regulating themselves. They'll understand kind of why this emotion, what they can do. Yeah.
And so basically, I mean, it's an AI-based platform, so I'm sure it needs a lot of work. It needs updating, right, with time, because you need to update it based on feedback and stuff like that. And so who's doing that, and how does that work?
Yeah, we do that all. Oh, sorry, go on.
I just wanted to talk about one thing that we haven't mentioned, which is also kind of at the back end of our platform. But we've built a world-class network of over 70 mental health clinicians in different, ethnicities, religions, cultural background, intersectional identities that have spent their whole lives researching what works and what doesn't work for specific identities, which words to include, which topics must be, very relevant for specific communities, which, experiences might also be extremely relevant for specific populations. And they help us clinically vet and verify the adaptations we do to our content. We're kind of able to digitize their knowledge and make it extremely accessible. We continuously update whatever is on our content based on our clinical network and make sure that we have the most up-to-date and relevant resources coming from them. And sorry, Akanksha, I cut you off, but I think it's also a very important part of the back end of our work.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said Khalil, it's very important to stay ahead of how AI is being used and incorporated, especially when it comes to things like mental health or just health in general. And so we incorporate it in a few different ways. So it's not just a recommendation engine, but we also use larger language models that use and incorporate these cultural practices and research that is happening not just in North America, but across the globe. And then we also leverage generative AI to deliver all of our resources and content using ethnic avatars that are representative of our user base. They look like and feel like and talk like our users. So whether that's different languages, different accents, ages, skin color, gender. So we're able to represent our users in all of these different ways.
And I guess you work with an AI company, right, to do that, or do you do it yourselves?
we build all of our technology in-house. We do leverage some of existing open source information. Obviously, we're not trying to compete with larger avatar companies, or we're not trying to compete with larger entire language models that already exist. But we want to make sure that there is a concept and amount of cultural adaptation that's happening in this system.
And that is great work. And so the companies you're working with right now, are they all based in North America, or are you starting to branch out to other countries too?
Yeah, we've been receiving a lot of inbound traction coming from the GCC, from the UK. Currently, just from our B2B partnership, we have users in over 20 countries. And because of our cultural competent aspect, we're able to easily tap into those international markets and provide our solutions for the community and populations that really need them.
Great. And what does the future hold? What are you thinking about in the future with the company, where it's going to go?
We know we're never going to be able to replace therapy, but we're very confident that we'll be as close as possible to this, to be able to really optimize the therapist where they're needed in terms of crisis intervention, and make sure that as many people as possible have access to our platform.
And yeah, it was great talking to you all, and I mean, it's a culturally diverse company. I mean, if I talked to Alexandra from Lebanon, Dalia from Yemen, Akanksha from India, and they've lived a lot of places around the world. So they know what different cultures look like, and how people feel when they go from place to place. And this is probably a reflection of what's happening now with immigration all over the world. I think people are going all over, and that's going to be very important in the future. So hopefully we'll hear more about you in the future, and more success stories, and also maybe we'll see the results of your work, hopefully in terms of prevention of mental health problems from occurring down the road. Thank you very much for being on the podcast.
Thank you so much, Khalil.
Thank you so much, Khalil.
Thank you.